So now we know HTML and CSS, and after a few exercises, we also saw that it's actually kind of fun to create HTML pages with some CSS styling. The problem is, it takes lots of work to create a good and professional looking website with just plain HTML and CSS. At some point, you may be wondering, when we write programs, we don't program everything from scratch. We use libraries that provide pre-created functions. Are there any libraries that help us create nice-looking web pages? The answer is actually yes, and today we'll introduce the most widely used web UI library, Bootstrap. Before we look at Bootstrap, let's first introduce the concept of responsive web design. The idea is that these days, there are actually more people browsing the web on their cell phones than using computers. So it's very important that the website looks good on both desktop computers and on mobile devices. In the past, companies would actually set up two different websites, one for computer users and one for cell phone users. This approach has some serious issues. Two websites are obviously more expensive to maintain than one, and it's difficult to keep them in sync. People Googling your company will find two sites, which is confusing. And what if somebody is using a tablet? Do you send the person to the PC website or the phone website? So later, people came up with the idea of responsive web design, which is basically designing websites that can automatically adapt to different viewing environments. One of the pioneers of responsive design is the website of the newspaper Boston Globe. Let's take a look. So, as we can see, when we browse the Boston Globe's website on a desktop computer, it shows a full menu horizontally and a three-column layout. If we browse the website on a smaller screen, which we can simulate by just shrinking the browser window, you can see that at this point, the three-column layout becomes a two-column layout. And the third column goes below the other two. And if the screen size is even smaller, you can see that now it becomes a one-column layout. And further, notice that the horizontal menu collapsed into a so-called hamburger menu here. You can click on it and it shows a vertical menu here. And of course, on a larger screen, the layout is different. So this is pretty great, right? But you may be wondering, it took me an hour to create a simple page layout. How can I ever create something this complex and also make it responsive? Well, this, of course, is where the web user interface libraries can help. These UI libraries are also commonly known as CSS frameworks, though most of them also involve some JavaScript. If you look at the linked survey, you can see that Bootstrap is by far the most widely used CSS framework. There are many others to choose from, but I think Bootstrap is a good choice as the first UI library to learn, not just because it's the most widely used, but also because it's pioneered many concepts and techniques that are used in other frameworks. If you know Bootstrap, it's very easy to learn other CSS frameworks. So first, a little background about Bootstrap. It was originally developed by Twitter and later became an open source project that everybody can use and contribute. Its motto is responsive mobile first, and it's been the most popular web UI framework for quite some time. Its official website is at getbootstrap.com. Note that it's getbootstrap, not bootstrap.com, which is something completely unrelated. The current version of Bootstrap is version 4, and it requires a web page to be in HTML5. It's very easy to add Bootstrap to a web page. So just go to Get Started, and you can see that all you need to do is copy and paste a CSS link to the web page, and then copy and paste a few JavaScript links. It actually has a starter template that has a full HTML page layout, full HTML page structure with the CSS and JavaScript links included. So let's just copy this one. And I'm going to create a new page here. Let's call it test.html. And I'm going to copy over the starter template. Notice that there's not much in here. You have your typical HTML page structure, HTML head, body, and the inside head there's the Bootstrap CSS link, and the inside body there's a hello world and a few JavaScript links. And if we look at this in the browser, it looks like this. Nothing special yet. So let's start with a simple example. Now let's get rid of this level 1 heading and change this to a div, and let's put some random text in it. And now it looks like this. Again, nothing special yet. So how do we use Bootstrap? Well, Bootstrap provides lots of pre-created styles and functions in the form of some CSS classes. It's actually kind of similar to a Java library that provides lots of Java classes. And if you want to use the library, you just use those classes. And for us, learning Bootstrap is basically about learning Bootstrap's classes. So let's first give this div a border, and notice that I'm using a border class. And this, as you can see, as a border to the div. And the text seems to be too close to the border, so let's add a little bit padding. And I'm going to do a p3 class, and now we have a little bit padding there. And let's say I also want some background color, so maybe BG dark. Okay, maybe too dark. Maybe BG light. Yeah, I guess you can see that the BG light background color is a very light touch of gray. So we'll see what those things mean later on. But again, the main point of this example is to show that when it comes to using Bootstraps, it's all about using the CSS classes provided by Bootstrap. And there are quite a lot Bootstrap CSS classes, as we'll see later on. Okay, so this is kind of the overview of what we are going to talk about. And if you look at this and then compare the Bootstrap documentation, you can see that we roughly follow the outline of the Bootstrap documentation, and we'll discuss 4 important things in Bootstrap. Layout, this one, and components, this one, and content, this one, and some utilities, this one. And also at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how to use icons. Now, the first thing with Bootstrap is layout. To lay out a page using Bootstrap, we first need to put the blocks we want to lay out inside the element with either the container CSS class or the container fluid CSS class. Again, both of these CSS classes are provided by Bootstrap. By the way, I put a dot in front of the class name to indicate that it's a CSS class. Remember the CSS class selector and stuff. The difference between container and container fluid is that container fluid will make the container taking up the full width of the page, while container has a fixed width. And the fixed width is automatically adjusted based on the screen size. Whether to use container or container fluid is up to you. It generally depends on whether your website will look good when it always takes up the full width, or it looks good with a fixed width. I usually prefer using container. You can put a container or container fluid class on the body element here, or you can create a div element that you want to use as a container. I usually just put it on the body element. So once we have that, we can see that now this is now our container element, and it's not taking up the full width, but it does adjust its width based on screen sizes. Now, once you have a container, Bootstrap lets you lay out the elements inside the container using a grid system. You can put the CSS class row on some block element, usually a div element, to create a row. Each row has a grid of 12 columns. You can then use column classes to create blocks that take up certain number of columns. For example, if you say column 3, then the block will take up 3 columns on the grid. Let's see an example and see how it works. So first, let's create 3 blocks of equal widths. We can first, let's do it here. So this is what we want to do. We want to create 3 blocks having the equal width. And the first thing we want to do is to create another block that enclosing all this and put the row class on that block. And then we have the 3 blocks inside, and then we can give the column class to each. And Bootstrap will automatically give them equal width. So it will look something like this. Let me copy this 3 times, and if we don't do anything, the 3 blocks will be laid on top of each other. Now, let's say we want to put them in a 3-column layout like this with equal width. So let's create another div block, and this one we put row on it, and this one will contain the other 3, and for the other 3 we'll also put the column class on them. Oops, click the wrong thing. So now you can see that they are laid out in 3 columns. And we can also adjust the width of the 3 columns. For example, if I want one of them to take up half of the page width, and the other 2 each taking up roughly 1/4 of the width. Remember, each row has a grid of 12 columns. So if you want half of the page width, then the number of columns will be 6, and then 3 and 3 for the rest, for the other 2. So we can do something like this. We'll say this one will take up 3, and this one takes up 6 columns, this one takes up 3 columns, and 3 for this one. And now you can see that we have a wider column on the left and then 2 narrower columns on the right. So using a grid to create a layout is already quite useful. If you remember from our exercises and how hard it is to just use float to create 2 columns, and imagine that you have to do it 3. But now it's quite easy. You just specify the number of columns a block should take, and that's pretty much it. But even better, Bootstrap take it one step further to make it also responsive. Bootstrap can automatically detect screen sizes and let you specify how styling should change based on screen size. Bootstrap defines 5 device categories, also called responsive breakpoints in the documentation. So, extra small roughly corresponds to phone in portrait position. Small roughly corresponds to phone in landscape position. Medium is roughly the size of a tablet screen, and large and extra large are for desktop monitor screens. Notice that there is a shorthand for each device category except for extra small. For example, for small, the shorthand is SM. For medium, the shorthand is MD. Many Bootstrap classes have different variants for different device categories, and this allows us to say, I want certain style when the device screen is of certain size. So let's see how we can use these device categories in grid layout. There are 2 types of column classes we can use to specify how wide a block is. We can say column n, as we just saw in the example, and this actually means that the block should be n columns wide when the screen size is extra small or above. Notice the or above part. Because extra small is the smallest one, so if you just say column n, then this block will always be n column wide. Also notice that extra small is the only one that doesn't have a device shorthand, and that's why there's no device shorthand here. Now we can also add a device shorthand and then say basically that the block should be n columns when the screen size is certain screen size or above. For example, we can say the block should take up 6 columns when the screen size is medium or above. Now the real cool part about this is we can combine this together. For example, this one says that the block should take up 3 columns when the screen is large or extra large, and it should take up 4 columns when the screen size is medium, and it should take up 12 columns when the screen size is extra small or small. Now, remember what we saw on the Boston Globe website. Actually, let's just show it again. Why not? So originally it has 4-column layout. In fact, if the screen is very large, and if we shrink it, it becomes 3 columns. If we shrink it again, it becomes 2 columns, right? And we can actually do something like this with Bootstrap fairly easily. So let's take this one as an example, for example. So let's say that originally we want our 3-column layout on large screens. So we'll say on large screens, I want this one to take up 6 columns, and this one takes up 3, and this one takes up 3. And then what if we shrink the screen or on a smaller screen, and we can say that on a smaller screen, I still want this one to be 6 columns, but I want this one to be 6 column too, and this one, let's say 12 columns. Why not? Okay. So we can say something like medium, this one is still 6, and this one is still, this one becomes 6, and this one becomes 12. So notice that the way it works is it's medium or it's screen size or above. So if we have medium 6 and large 6, we can remove large 6. And now, if we refresh, is it because it thinks it's large? Okay, so yeah, I guess I increased the zoom level too much, so it think the screen size is small. Okay, so now it's the large screen, and if we shrink it a little bit, notice that now we're at medium-sized screen, and it becomes a 2-column plus 1-column layout like this. And we can also say if it's below medium, I want it to take up 12 columns. And so if we keep shrinking, so at some point when it reaches small screen size, it becomes 1-column layout, and 2-column, and then 3-column. So as you can see, using Bootstrap, we can implement something like Boston Globe's layout fairly easily, and it's responsive. So this is quite nice. So now that we know how Bootstrap Grid works, let's see if we can use it in a more complex example. Suppose we want to create our own Boston Globe clone, which we'll call it My Globe. And I want it to look like this. So just like Boston Globe, originally we have a 3-column layout, a horizontal menu, and a big page title here. And on smaller screens, it becomes something like this. And on even smaller screens, notice that the horizontal menu collapses into a hamburger menu. And also notice that the big page title is hidden, and now we replace it with a logo on small screens. So let's say we want to create something like this, and let's see how we can use Bootstrap to do that. So this is the end result, and this is what we will start with. So this is the HTML code for this page. So here, notice that I already put the Bootstrap CSS and Bootstrap JavaScript links here, but otherwise it's a fairly straightforward HTML. And I have three big blocks. I have a block called left, I have a block called middle, I have a block called right, and just to distinguish them, I give them a little bit background color, green, blue, and yellow, and that's why we have a green block here, a blue block here, and a yellow block here. And my menu currently is just a list, and this is a page title, which is level 1 heading. So knowing what we know, the first thing we do is we can create the layout, right? So the first thing is, let's put this as a container, and for the left block, let's see. So the left block is the widest as beginning, so it's probably, we'll do 5 and 4 and 3, so they add up to 12. And this one will say on large or extra large, it will be 5. And this one will be 3. And this one will be 4, something like that. Three, 5. Is my math failing me? So this one, no, it's not my math. It's we need a row to put them together. I thought I put the numbers greater than 12. That would be even more embarrassing, I guess. Okay, so now we have our initial layout. And just like what we did before, and we say if it becomes medium, I want this one to be 6 column, and I want this one to be 6 column too, and this one will become 12 columns. And once it reaches, once it goes below large. So if I shrink it, now this is a medium, 2 column plus 1, and if we goes below medium, then it becomes 1 column layout. By the way, if we can omit this one, in fact, so if it goes below the device category specified here, it automatically becomes full width of the page. So it's effectively a column 12 without you having to specify it. So basically like this. So now we have the layout, and let's create a menu. For the menu, we'll need to look at the UI components provided by Bootstrap. In particular, we'll want to use the navbar component. So here. So Bootstrap will give us a navbar like this, and if we shrink the screen, you can see that this navbar collapse into the horizontal menu collapse into a hamburger menu here, right? And by the way, Bootstrap has really good documentation. As you can see, it has not only code examples, it also shows you what they look like, and in fact, you can check out the responsive behavior just on the documentation page. So in most cases, when you want to use a Bootstrap component, you just need to copy and paste the example and then make some changes. And we'll do just that here. I'm going to copy this whole example, and then we'll make some changes. And after that, we'll explain a few details. So the menu is below the header, so let's put it here. It looks like a lot, but we can get rid of things that we don't need. So originally it has a search menu, a drop-down list, and so on. So we can get rid of both. So we'll get rid of the search field, and we'll also get rid of the drop-down menu. And what we end up with is something like this. And all we need to do is just put our links to it. And our link is, in fact, just empty links. So let me copy over a few things, and we'll call this sports. We'll call this metro. And no, this one would be business. And this one will be opinion. And the first one will be metro, and let's change this to metro. And then we can get rid of the old menu here. Okay, so now it kind of works, and let's look at some details. So you can see that the nav bar uses a nav HTML element, and there are a whole bunch of Bootstrap CSS classes here. So most of them you don't really need to worry about. It just like using a programming language API. If it says you need a navbar toggler, then you put a navbar toggler there. There's not too much to say about that. The thing I do want to mention a few things. One is this navbar brand, which is this one, and this is what typically you want to have our company logo or company name on the navigation bar, and we'll keep it here for now, and later on we'll replace it with the globe logo. And then as for the menu itself, as you can see, the structure is basically an unordered list in HTML, and each menu item is just a list item with some specific Bootstrap classes. And the currently selected link or the currently selected page has an active class, so it looks different from the rest. And most of these are Bootstrap CSS classes, which, as I said, there's not too much to say about them. But when you look at those elements, you do see some attributes that don't look quite familiar. For example, there's an attribute called data toggle, and then there's something called data target, and then there's something called area controls, and so on. So the the attributes that start with data dash, these are not standard HTML attributes. These are HTML5 user-defined attributes. Prior to HTML5, you can only use attributes defined in the HTML specification, but HTML5 lets users to create their own attributes. As long as those attributes start with data dash, it's fine. And these attributes are mostly used to add some additional data to an element, and this data is usually used by some JavaScript code. So if you see some attributes that start with data, those are user-defined attributes used mostly for JavaScript code. And for those area attributes, these are something that you see quite often when you use Bootstrap examples. These are accessibility attributes. They make web content more accessible to people with disabilities. You can check out the linked website for more information on these area attributes. So now we have the menu bar in place, and let's try it. Okay, so it collapsed. It collapsed a little bit too early, maybe. So notice that here it says navbar expand large, meaning that only on large and extra large screens it will expand the menu bar. If you want medium size, also have the horizontal menu bar, you can change this to expand MD. And this button, of course, is one that's shown here. I guess large and extra large are open, so let's just keep that. See it there that way. Okay, so moving on, now that we have the menu, I want to just quickly show some forms and tables without really doing examples of our own, because again, Bootstrap documentation already have very good examples. So so please check out forms, which is under component, and tables, which is under content. So if you want a table that looks like this, it's very easy. All you need to do is just give it a class table, and it automatically styles the table like this, which is, you know, pretty nice looking and also quite convenient. And if you want a dark table, you can say table dark. If you want certain table head options, you can do that. And if you want striped rows, meaning that odd rows and even rows have different colors, you can do a table striped class, and it adds that styling. And if you want a full border, you can simply say table and table bordered. And if you, where is the mouse over thing? One of the class, yes, here. One of the things I like most is when somebody mouse over a row, it highlights the row, and this is quite useful when you have a table that has lots of columns. And to have this effect, all you need is to say table hover and add that class to the table, and it has that effect. So really nice and simple to use. And another thing that you use quite often is form, because we are doing web development, and web development needs to use forms to get user input. And to create nice looking forms like this, all you need is to create some divs with form group class and the form control class and so on. So check out these examples, and there are also examples later on that shows how to make forms responsive. If, for example, on large screens, you can put two fields on the same row. On smaller screens, each field will have its own row and so on. So check out the examples in the documentation. And then I want to show a few Bootstrap utility class. And these utility classes let us to set border, set margin, padding, and so on. You may be wondering why we need to use Bootstrap utility classes to do this, since doing this in plain CSS is already quite simple. The answer is that Bootstrap utility classes are responsive, meaning that they typically automatically adjust based on different screen sizes, and they also support color themes, which we'll talk about in a moment. And oftentimes they just really more convenient to use than writing plain CSS. For example, if we look at borders, so if you want borders on all sides, you can say border. If you just want border on one of the sides, you can say border top, border bottom, border right, and so on. Or you can say, I want a full border minus the top or minus the bottom or something like that. And you can set different border colors. So in our example, where is it? Yeah, so this is the one we're working on. And let's say we want to add a border to bottom border to the stories. So let's come here, and so we'll say this one. Let's give it a border bottom. So now it has a border. Not sure if you can see this, but it's a very light colored border. So maybe we want to say border bottom dark. Okay, maybe not dark. How do we specify color again? Oh, we say border bottom and then border color. Okay, so we'll say border bottom and then border dark. Right, so now it gives us a darker border, so that's good. And we can then do this for other stories. And now this one has a border too, like bottom border. And what if we want to set some margin and padding? So same deal again. If we look at this, we can see that each story a little bit too close to the next. So maybe we want to increase the margin a little bit. And in this case, I'm going to increase the bottom margin. So in Bootstrap, you can specify margins and paddings using property name, which is either M for margin and P for padding, and then followed by size. If you want bottom, you'll say B. Margin bottom will be MB, and then you'll say size. Now, size is not the actual number of pixels. Size are like scales. It gives you a scale of 1 to 5, and 1 would be a small margin or small spacing, and 5 would be larger. Now, the A good thing about using that size scale rather than the actual pixels is that Bootstrap automatically adjusts the scale based on the screen sizes. So here, for example, we can say if we want a little bit margin at the bottom, we'll say MB2 at the bottom. And now you see there's a little bit margin there. And if we want to have a larger one, we can say margin bottom 4. And now the margin is bigger. And after the class, please take a look at documentation. I just keep saying this because reading documentation is really pretty important, and it will explain how this thing works, and NP, top, bottom, left, right, horizontally, vertically, so on and so forth. So check out the documentation after class. And then colors. So as we probably have noticed here, when you try to specify color, in Bootstrap, it doesn't define color like red, green, or blue. Instead, it defines colors as primary color, secondary color, success color, and so on. So, for example, if you look at the documentation, you can see that it defines color as primary, secondary, success, danger, warn, info, light, dark. By the way, this is why we have a border dark, basically saying using dark color for border, and so on and so forth. So you can use these colors for text, using text primary, text secondary. You can use these colors for background. You can use these colors for background here, and you can use these colors for borders. For example, you can say border dark or border primary, which will set the border using the primary color, which in this case will be the blue color. So you may be wondering why primary color, secondary color, instead of just red, green, and blue. And that's because these colors constitute a color theme. And by sticking to using these theme colors, you'll ensure that your website has a consistent look. And even better, you can easily change the whole look of a website by simply applying a different color theme. For example, you can find quite a few free Bootstrap themes on the website Bootswatch. For example, if you are not happy with the default, grayish Bootstrap color theme, you can go to Bootswatch and find themes like Cerulean, Cosmo. If you want a dark theme, you can use Cyborg or Darkly, and so on. And they are also very easy to use. All you need to do is basically replacing the default Bootstrap CSS link with one of the theme CSS links. So you go to this website and then copy over the link for the theme CSS, replace the original Bootstrap. You'll see that your website will completely change, and that's quite nice. And in order to have that, you need to stick with the color themes using things like primary color, secondary color instead of a specific color. Now, there's one more utility I want to mention, display. This one is particularly useful when you want to hide something or show something based on screen sizes. For example, here, I want to hide the page title when the screen size is small. So what I can do is I can give it this, and I can use one of the display classes or display utility classes. So display utility classes look like this. You can say D and then a value, and then or D add some device category or breakpoint, and then some value. Values are like none or inline or something. So if you say D none, that means this will not be displayed at all. And if we refresh, you can see it's done. But of course, we don't want it to be always hidden. So we'll say D large block. Now, what's after large? What value to use for display depends on the element itself. H1 is a block element. So here we are basically saying that if the screen is large or extra large, display it as a block element. So why it's not showing? Is it because it thinks this is not large enough? Or is it because D large value is block? Should work. LG block. Is it because it's not saved? I do have autosave here. Why it's not showing anymore? So if I remove this and refresh, what happened is my browser having some issue. Okay, so now it shows up. I guess my browser just cached a version, doesn't. Anyway, let's put this one back in. Oops. And see if it does what it's supposed to do. So now large is shown, and then, okay, so once it becomes medium, it's hidden. Okay, now it works. Yeah, I guess it's my browser or something. Anyway, so this is how we can hide and show certain things. And then later we'll hide and show this logo as well. So yeah, for display, the most useful part is to hide and show something based on screen sizes. And oftentimes you want to do that. For example, on a smaller screen, you want to hide certain content and show only the more important ones, or on smaller screen, you want to replace a big title with a logo and those type of things. Okay, so let's do the last part, which is to show a logo like this globe icon, which currently we only have a nav bar. Now, I want to use that as an example to show how to use icons. There are many icon sets online. For example, this is a Bootstrap icons. And you can see there are lots of them. And these are material design icons. Material design, by the way, is a design language used by Android. And if you want to have those type of icons on your website, you can use this icon set. So many of these icon sets let you add icons to your web pages as images. And we already know how to handle images. Some icon sets, on the other hand, like the Font Awesome icon set, let you add icons as special fonts. So here I want to show an example of that. First, we'll need to add Font Awesome CSS to the web page. The newer versions require you to either host it yourself or register. So we'll just use an older version hosted on some content delivery network. So go here and copy this one. So we'll copy the link tag. This will give us a link to version 5.14, which is quite recent enough. Oops, not that. So format, yes. Okay, so this is the Font Awesome CSS. Now we have that. We can then add icons from this icon set. Because Font Awesome has so many icons, the best way is actually to just search for it on their website. So go to their website, and then you can search the icons you want. For example, if you want a calendar icon, you can search for calendar, and it will show a bunch of calendars. The ones that you can select, the grayed out ones are the ones that will cost money. You have to pay for those, and the non-grayed out ones are free ones. For us, we are going to search for a globe icon, and we'll use this one. So once you select the icon, you can see a button here that says start using this icon. Click on that, and it will give you a piece of HTML code. Note that this is not an image tag. This is a font tag, basically. So we'll put this here to replace the navbar print, and so now we have this logo here. And just like before, we can show or hide this logo based on screen sizes. So let's say originally we want to hide it because we have the big globe title here. So we can say if display, let's put it down here. So we can say display large none, meaning that it doesn't display when the screen size is large, and otherwise it will display as an inline element. So the inline, and so now it's not displayed, but once the title is hidden, this one is shown. So again, whether it's inline or whether it's block depends on the element. I is an inline element and H1 is a block element. So okay, so let's do one more thing. I want the page title to be center aligned, and there's a Bootstrap class for that. It's called text center, I guess, or text center. Okay, So now we have created this as we started out to do. And in terms of found awesome icons, please also check out the documentation if you do use this icon set. In particular, the documentation tells you some additional usage of the icons, like how to make the icons bigger or smaller and so on. So check out the documentation. This is pretty much it. This is a very quick introduction to Bootstrap. As I said, the Bootstrap documentation is really, really good. Once you understand the basics, it's very easy to use. So this is the end of this video. See you in the next one.